Watch this.
Idaho has an extensive backlog of unsolved crimes, dozens that go back decades. But two former investigators are hoping to bring some closure to some families by turning up the heat on these cold cases with the help of a federal grant. The city of Boise says they won't use their resources to investigate abortion cases within city limits. A closer look at how that declaration may apply to county or state police. You know, seeing a meteor isn't really a rarity, but seeing one that lasts almost as long as a TV commercial, well, that might just be one of the longest captured on camera. It was recorded right here in Eagle. You know, solving crimes relies on good detectives. It also takes some good communication and the right equipment. Without it, a case could go cold. Idaho State Police declare a cold case once investigators have exhausted every lead, every angle, and they come out with no answers. But that could change with advanced DNA methods. Right now, ISP has their eye on up to about 50 cold cases across the state that could move forward with this new process. That's going to take more staff, though, and more money. Here's Andrew Bartline and KTVB's crime reporter Alex Duggan.
The Idaho State Police Forensics Lab houses shelves of DNA evidence.
The physical cards of someone's cheek swab.
Each card,
And the pink will turn to white.
represents the DNA of a convicted felon or sex offender,
We called it lawfully owed.
owed directly to the state.
Those felons from our state will go into CODIS, into the database, to be compared against any crime scene sample. And that happens regularly, constantly.
But it doesn't happen every time. ISP Forensics Director Matthew Gamet says some felons don't submit a sample at all.
We want to bring these cases to a conclusion point for the families.
Missing felon DNA hinders police from catching reoffenders. It's one of several problems that's led Idaho State Police to form the Idaho Cold Case and Advanced DNA Methods Task Force. ISP created the group in 2020.
As we recognize that we had a lot of these cases, maybe 40 or 50 of these cases that had never hit to anything, and we started to see this new advanced DNA technology emerge, we recognized we could do more.
The Cold Case Unit connects ISP investigators with local law enforcement and county prosecutors.
Send the investigators out to the local agency. They'll ask if they have any cases that are unsolved, cold cases where there might be DNA that we could use. And then they start to work with that agency to get the DNA submitted to determine what type of testing they need to do. We're going to get to a suspect. And so then those investigators help the local agency to follow up on getting a DNA sample from the suspect and to be able to close that case, take it to court, hopefully.
Gamet says up to 50 cases in Idaho will benefit from this process, but more resources are needed to expand for demand.
To get more people, get more cases worked, those kind of things.
ISP applied for a $2.5 million federal grant to expand the task force. This is to hire investigators to ensure felons turn in DNA samples.
And they can test from this card.
And to assist local agencies to gather and test DNA leads, along with connecting the crime to a suspect. The $2.5 million grant is distributed over a 3-year span. ISP won't know if they've received this grant until October.
So what we're looking to do is expand it so we can even do more, because we don't have enough resources at the state level. That's why we're approaching the grant. So you will start to see cases solved immediately.
If ISP receives this grant in October, they hope to hire for these positions by January of 2023. And these positions will have to be filled by either current or retired law enforcement. That's because Gamet says these people will technically be deputized. That means they are certified to work with local agencies all throughout the state of Idaho. Now, additionally, Brian, these investigators have to have an understanding of warrants, I should say. So if you're going to get DNA from somebody who's a potential suspect, you need to understand how that works out. So they're really looking for retired law enforcement or current law enforcement to make a switch to fill these positions if they get this grant in October.
Okay, so in getting that, the timing of this, you heard him say the last thing he said was they could make or should make an immediate impact. Is it really that simple? More money, solve problems kind of thing?
Well, we wouldn't know that for sure. They're saying it's going to be immediate impact, but we do know that there's been some success with this. Now, our crime reporter Alex Duggan wrote this earlier today and what's going to be on our website. There's a case called Mr. Bones, and it says Mr. Bones was an unidentified man found in the forest of Idaho in 1984. The man's identity was unsolved until 2020.
Okay.
Now, this group is who solved it. They did some genealogy testing of the bones that gave Idaho investigators enough leads to contact potential siblings, then confirm that that's who this person was. And I think that led them all the way out to Oklahoma to find that family. So they have had success with this. They say if they get more resources, they will have continued and more success.
Okay, we'll see how that plays out, and we'll find out when, if they get this grant?
October.
October. All right, thank you very much, Andrew. Well, the ripple effect of Boise's abortion resolution continues to expand. On Tuesday, during the weekly city council meeting, the city declared it's not going to prioritize city resources to help in an investigation of anyone accused of violating Idaho's new abortion ban, which is set to begin next month. Mayor Lauren McLean told the 208 yesterday the city will not invade the privacy of individuals and doctors who are making really tough decisions. Decisions, she said, that should remain private. She said Boise police, which would do these investigations, would be better off keeping our community safe. Now, there's been some questions, though, about how a city can pass such a resolution saying they won't enforce a law. Can they do that? Is there anything in Idaho law that, well, could force Boise or Boise police to investigate claims of these abortions? Joe Paris, you've been asking that question of a lot of people today, and unfortunately, there really isn't a definitive answer to this.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of unknowns, but some people are pointing to one section of Idaho code that we're going to dive into a second. But the caveat I want to give at the beginning of this story, a lot of the people that are supposed to be in the know, they just don't know right now. It's very new and it's happening now. But I did speak with Wendy Olson today, the former U.S. attorney for Idaho. She's now in private practice, and she shared some thoughts with me really about the section of code that people are talking about. Section of code, Idaho Code, Title 31, Chapter 22, and that deals with the powers of the county sheriffs in the state of Idaho. And the code says this in part, quote, whenever in the opinion of the governor, any peace officer of the state refuses to offer assistance when requested to do so, or refuses to perform any duty enjoined upon him by the penal statutes of the state, the governor shall direct the attorney general to commence action under this title of Idaho Code to remove such officer from office. So it creates some questions. Could an officer be removed in the city of Boise if they're not investigating a crime? Well, Olson tells us that the section that we just talked about, it only applies to state police, not local police like Boise police. In that same section of code, it does detail other scenarios where a county prosecutor or a sheriff could involve the governor's office or even the attorney general's office in a situation where state police or local police aren't cooperating after they were asked for help. But Olson says that the Boise resolution, it doesn't really fit this section of law for a few reasons, including having a conflict with Idaho's abortion law.
The city council's resolution really is almost really not in conflict with it for three reasons. One is that the resolution is just that, a resolution. It's not a regulation or ordinance. It doesn't prescribe the behavior of any Boise city citizens. It doesn't, for example, say that it's okay to have an abortion, that providers can provide abortions. That would be in conflict perhaps with the trigger statute. It doesn't say that. And then I think if you look at the language of the Boise City Council resolution, it's actually pretty careful. It says the city will not prioritize investigation providers, and it will not expend additional resources on such investigations. And governmental bodies always have to decide how to allocate scarce resources. I mean, that's what they do. That's part of what, that's why there are budgets, and that's why governments put together programs on what they want to prioritize or not. And I think the Boise City Council is just doing that.
A major caveat here is that anything can be litigated, and it won't be surprising if this comes up in an Idaho courtroom one day soon. Now, the situation also highlights a potential gray area for law enforcement in the Boise area. I reached out to the Ada County Sheriff's Office for how this resolution in Boise could impact them, and they tell us this, quote, we are still analyzing the situation and figuring out what this means for our agency. What I can tell you is we generally don't investigate reports of crimes in another jurisdiction unless specifically asked to by that agency. In general terms, we investigate activity in our jurisdiction that the Idaho legislature has determined to be crimes and pass that information to the Ada County Prosecutor's Office, who makes a charging decision. So it's a very complicated, intricate situation here. Of note, though, Boise Police has commented on this concept, and they actually tweeted info out a number of weeks ago. In a tweet thread about the decision in Doms v. Jackson, BPD tweeted out, quote, pending legal review and input from Boise City Council, Boise Police are not planning on providing additional resources to investigate reports regarding abortion. We understand that there are many strong feelings on the issue, and we will follow the direction of our legal team. So, There are a lot of unknowns out there, as we've highlighted several times in this story, but I did reach out to Governor Little's office with some questions. They didn't respond immediately, but Governor Little did take to Twitter to comment, and he actually quoted our story from yesterday's 208. Little writes, quote, "Idaho led the nation in protecting preborn lives. When the trigger law goes into effect in a few weeks, abortion will be illegal in Idaho. That's the law of the land, and as elected officials, we must uphold the law." There appears to be a lot of unknowns here in the situation. And Brian, I spoke with Idaho State Police a short time ago. They said, you know, as a law enforcement agency, we believe in upholding the law. If you read between the lines here, there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of questions. You know, the questions that we sent to the governor's office was, you know, is there anything you would do or could do to make sure that the laws of Idaho are being enforced from the executive branch perspective? And we didn't get a response directly to our questions. We talked about the tweet, but a possible explanation here is we don't know.
Yeah, that seems to be the answer you're getting a lot these days. And I find it interesting. You posted that tweet from Boise PD from back last month, June 25th. The mayor, the city council didn't have to make this resolution public. They could have just, as they said, go along with the police declaration. They're saying, yeah, it's not going to be a priority. But I guess they're going out and taking that one step further and declaring it and saying, we're not going to make this a priority when it comes to prosecuting anybody who's accused of this crime.
Right, and to make a comparison for people at home, if you're maybe a little confused here, again, this is a totally different example, but in Ada County, there's our fireworks ordinances.
Yep.
Aerial fireworks are illegal in the county. Of course, though, as we saw over 4th of July weekend, you'll see, hundreds of fireworks go up during the night. The decision is made from law enforcement to prioritize how are we going to go after this. So it is a very different situation, fireworks and abortion, of course, not comparing the two, but in the sense of prioritizing budget and prioritizing resources, it's within the purview to do that within a city or county. So we'll have to watch this play out and we'll follow it here on the 208.
And it's no different than like the city of Star declaring itself a Second Amendment sanctuary city a couple of years ago. If there was a law passed that would regulate guns in such a way, are they just not going to enforce it? I mean, that's the question that we have to. And as we talked about this, there's a lot of unknowns because the dog has finally caught the car in this thing. They wanted this to happen. Here we are. And yet everybody's like, now what? I don't know.
4 words. See you in court.
That's what it be. All right. Thank you very much, Joe. You know, when you get above the city lights, you get a chance of seeing them a little bit better. But there's an exception in the backyard of an Eagle home, where they're catching meteors flying through the nighttime sky on a nightly basis. All right, just like we do every day, we want to hear from you. Send us a text message, day or night, 208-321-5614. Just be sure to include your name and the hashtag #the208, and stick around. We could share yours at the end of the show. The Perseid meteor shower returned in all its galactic glory 4 days ago. It's the time of year when Earth passes through the dust trail left behind by the comet Swift-Tuttle. Yeah, it just kind of blows through there. Every year it happens. Barring any overbearing light pollution, you can get out and see some of these. And a lot of local astronomers, amateur stargazers are out there trying to get a glimpse of that dust that we would only see as it entered the atmosphere as a meteor. Well, Jordan Ragsdale of Eagle has seen a lot of these meteors. For the past year or so, he's recorded countless of them On his outdoor camera, some days he gets as few as 20, some mornings he wakes up to as many as 500 recorded meteors. Well, early yesterday morning, just after 5 a.m., Jordan caught more than a glimpse of a meteor. One that he says was the longest he's ever recorded and maybe the longest ever recorded.
This one just stood out because it happened over multiple cameras. And anytime that happens, it's always like, oh, that was a long traveling meteor. It's pretty unusual for it to, go so far that it goes from one camera angle to the next. And as I was looking more, I was like, wow, this is 4 camera angles, and not only that, but it kind of started on the northern horizon. And then, I didn't even see it finish behind the southern horizon. It, went behind a tree before I could see it. So
27 seconds, is that a long time for a meteor?
I think it's pretty unusual because, most of the time they just burn up in the atmosphere. They call it an earth grazer, where it just kind of grazes the earth. They've even speculated some of them will just skip off the atmosphere. They'll just light up a little bit, and that's enough resistance that'll, send them out of the atmosphere. But this one looks like it, just had that perfect angle that it, just coasted right through. So
this camera that you have it's mounted on the side of your house.
Yep. It captures pretty much every meteor that goes by. I usually review them over a cup of coffee in the morning, because you can go through, and most of them are just tiny little blips. But, every once in a while they jump out at you, pretty bright. If you get a real bright one, it's exciting. So,
Or a real long one, like you said.
Or a long one, yeah. So it's a little bit like, treasure hunting. You never know what you're going to find in the morning. So it's opening up a little present, while you're having your coffee every morning.
Quite the present Jordan found yesterday morning. Jordan says his camera is connected to a network of hundreds of these types of cameras, and they all send their videos to a centralized database. And there's another one of these in Glens Ferry, he says, and they are compiling the video from that one to see if the meteor he captured is in fact the longest ever recorded on camera. He said he should know that answer in about a day or so. It's also been sent, that video of his, to NASA to see if in fact it was a meteor or part of the Perseid meteor shower, because, well, it could have been anything, but they're going to look at the trajectory, and NASA has, well, the means to do that. The annual phenomenon, the Perseid meteor shower, lasts through August 24th, by the way, with its peak expected to be August 13th, which is the time that we should see the most meteors burning through the sky. Should see is the key phrase here, because that night, August 13th, happens to line up with the next full moon, the Sturgeon moon. According to NASA, is going to appear for about 3 days from Wednesday morning through Saturday morning. But the meteors, they should burn brighter than the moonlight. That's the way it should be. So seeing them shouldn't be too much of a problem. These crunchy creatures are back in Idaho and swarming an Idaho highway. We have the sights and the sounds. All right, before we head to the break, it's a great time to join the 208 conversation. You got a question or a comment about the show? Just send them to us by text message to the number on your screen, 208-321-5614. Don't forget to include your name and the hashtag #the208. Summer days, best time to get the dogs out would be, well, earlier in the day. Most people take advantage of the parks across the city of Boise to do that. Some of them dedicated specifically to dogs, like Dog Island at Ann Morrison Park, which has proven to be very popular. There's even a pond that dogs can jump into to cool off. But just outside the pond, apparently there are a few other things owners need to avoid at Dog Island. Tim sent us this email earlier this week. Ann Morrison Dog Park, very disappointed. They've stopped using weed control, and there are several large spots, 20 feet circles, he says, each covered low to the ground thistles with large spikes on them. They're just going to get bigger, not very dog friendly, let alone full of weeds, not grass. Well, if you've ever been to Dog Island, you likely know there's really not a lot of grass there to begin with. We went down there, though, this morning to kind of take a look into this thistle problem for ourselves, and we did find a few patches of those thistles. However, it took our photographer about 10 minutes of walking around to find even several large spots of said thistles that Tim claims are there. They're not 20-foot circles of them, though, either, but they're there. So the city has, I guess the question is, has the city stopped using weed control measures in the park? And we asked the city of Boise's Park and Rec Department that question. They tell us the park maintenance team has not stopped using weed control at that park, but they're aware that there are some patches of some invasive thistle there. In fact, they're in the midst of a multi-year application and removal strategy to reduce the population of those. They do say the health of everyone and safety of everyone, including the dogs, is their top priority, adding they would never apply anything to the ground, to those weeds that would be harmful to dogs or people. They're currently coordinating with their volunteer group to work on a hand-removing process to get those thistles out of there, which that could last into the fall. So keep an eye out. If you notice any of those invasive weeds or species located in parks, they say, Boise Parks and Rec says to contact them directly.
And possibly a good day to get out there to some of the parks, and you can see 100 degrees. It's a little hot out there, as you notice, and it has been from a 103 in Ontario to 99 in Nampa, who probably will hit 100, 96 in Twin Falls. You see those temperatures in the mountains right around 90 degrees. So how many 100-degree days have we had so far as we head in from late spring into the summer months? We've had 9 days of 100 degrees or above. I chose June 26th. And the reason why I chose that is because it seemed like at that point when all of the heat became really consistent, okay, as we got toward the end of June. So June was pretty nice. We had 13 days between 90 and 99 degrees, and then 4 days below 90 degrees. Now that's the problem right here. If you like a little, not so hot, well, we've only had about 4 days so far, and that's when we consider about 25, 26 days. And by the way, we also counted today, which hit 100 degrees. Red flag warning, okay, that's for tomorrow between noon to 9, so be very careful in those spots, and we hope not.
Oh yeah, they're back. A little late this year, but they're back. Skin crawling just thinking about it. We're talking about Mormon crickets, and if you're new to the area, Mormon crickets, well, they're not technically crickets, they're katydids or grasshoppers. But they do take their name from the Mormon settlers back in the mid-1800s. And now more than 200 years later, these grasshoppers are still hopping around, and they usually return in some capacity during the summer, finding their way to southwest part of the state every few years or so. Last week, a swarm of them were spotted south of Mountain Home, like way south of Mountain Home. Quick warning though, if you get a little queasy, you may not want to turn your volume up for this part of the show, because unfortunately, this is so Idaho. This video from the Idaho Transportation Department along Highway 51. Yeah. South of Mountain Home, I said. Runs all the way to the Nevada border, that road. Hundreds, maybe thousands of shield-backed katydids covering the highway. And that sound you hear, that'd be the crunching of the shields on their backs. Yep, that's what that is. These flightless insects can grow up to about 3 inches in length, and they move pretty quickly. They can move about a mile a day, and they can cause pretty serious ag issues, even traffic hazards. Don't worry, though. They do clean up after themselves. You know why? Because they're cannibals. So if you run over some of those, the rest will just kind of rush in and feed on them, which kind of carries them the next mile or so. Ugh. All right, several text messages today about Boise not wanting to pursue any accusations of abortion and the law that will go into effect next month. Your analogy of the dog catching the car is spot on. I don't think those who trained this dog really understood all the possible ramifications, says Jack in Boise. There's a lot of unknowns out there that a lot of people don't have any answers to. Isn't it nice that our liberal mayor thinks she's above the Supreme Court? Why doesn't she go back to Boston, says TR. The other side of that, I've been disappointed recently with Idaho politics setting women's rights back. However, I'm proud to live in Boise and to have a mayor willing to take a stand. Thank you, Mayor McLean, says Liz. See you in court is only as good as, well, the appointed judge, says Jill in Boise, because there are going to be a lot of lawsuits from all sides when it comes to abortion in Idaho. So stay tuned for that. We'll see you back here tomorrow.